Welcome to Lost at 3 a.m. Put your phone down, close your eyes, and let this be the last video you hear tonight. Relax, breathe, and let's begin. Some shows make you laugh, some make you cry. And then there's The Office, a show that somehow feels like home. Whether it's the ridiculous workplace pranks, the painfully awkward meetings, or the unexpected moments of heart, The Office has become one of the most beloved sitcoms of all time. But The Office didn't start as a cultural phenomenon. In fact, when it first premiered, it was almost cancelled after its first season. The humour was different, the characters were unconventional, and audiences weren't sure what to make of its mockumentary format. Then, something changed. The show found its voice, and with it, a dedicated fan base that would only grow larger over time. Michael Scott's cringeworthy charm, Jim and Pam's slow-burn romance, Dwight's absurd but strangely brilliant behaviour, it all clicked. Even after ending in 2013, the series has never really left the spotlight. New generations continue to discover it, binging all 9 seasons, quoting their favourite lines, and turning its funniest moments into endless memes. It's the kind of show people re-watch over and over, not just because it's funny, but because it feels comforting, familiar, like visiting old friends. Tonight, we're diving into the story behind The Office, how it started, how it changed TV forever, and why it remains one of the most re-watchable shows in history. So sit back, picture yourself at Dunder Mifflin, and let's begin. Before The Office became the beloved, endlessly re-watchable series that fans know today, it was something else entirely. A short, awkward, and brutally uncomfortable British sitcom. Created by Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant, the UK version of The Office aired in 2001 and introduced audiences to a style of humour that was dry, painfully realistic, and at times almost too awkward to watch. It followed the misadventures of a small office run by David Brent, a self-absorbed, clueless boss played by Gervais himself. The show only lasted 12 episodes and a Christmas special, but its mockumentary format, cringeworthy humour, and surprisingly emotional core set it apart from anything on television at the time. Hollywood took notice, but adapting The Office for an American audience was a huge risk. The original was distinctly British. Its comedy was dry, sarcastic, and filled with uncomfortable silences that American sitcoms weren't known for. NBC decided to take a chance and brought in Greg Daniels, a writer from The Simpsons and Saturday Night Live, to rework the series for a new audience. But instead of making a direct copy, Daniels and his team made subtle but important changes that allowed the show to find its own identity. Michael Scott, played by Steve Carell, was still a terrible boss, but unlike David Brent, he had an endearing quality that made audiences root for him despite his flaws. The humour became slightly warmer, and while the awkwardness remained, the show also embraced more heartfelt moments, allowing viewers to connect with the characters on a deeper level. Setting the series in Scranton, Pennsylvania, rather than a big city, gave it a uniquely American feel, making Dunder Mifflin feel like a real small-town paper company filled with people just trying to get through the workday. Despite these changes, the first season of The Office struggled. Many critics felt it was too similar to the UK version, and audiences weren't sure what to make of its unusual style. NBC considered cancelling the show, but then something changed. By the second season, The Office had found its voice. The writing leaned into its own style of humour. The characters became more well-rounded, and Carell's portrayal of Michael Scott evolved from unbearable to surprisingly lovable. With episodes like The Dundies and Office Olympics, the show no longer felt like an adaptation. It had become something entirely original. From that point on, The Office took off, growing into one of the most successful and beloved sitcoms of all time. What started as a risky remake of a small British comedy became a defining series of a generation, proving that sometimes taking a chance on an idea that doesn't quite fit the mold can lead to something truly special. Michael Scott is one of the most unforgettable characters in television history. At first glance, He's everything a boss shouldn't be. Awkward, inappropriate, and completely unaware of how his actions affect the people around him. But as the series unfolds, Michael becomes something more. He's not just a terrible boss, he's a deeply flawed but strangely lovable person who wants nothing more than to be admired, respected, and loved by the people he considers his family. When The Office first began, Michael was written as a direct counterpart to David Brent from the UK version. Harsh, selfish, and painfully difficult to watch. But as the show grew into its own identity, so did Michael Scott. Steve Carell's portrayal evolved, softening Michael's edges while still keeping him unpredictable and hilariously clueless. He became less mean-spirited and more like an over-enthusiastic, misguided uncle who desperately wanted to be the fun boss but never quite knew how. Michael's incompetence was legendary. He held unnecessary meetings, made wildly inappropriate jokes, and spent more time trying to impress his employees than actually managing them. He believed himself to be a genius in business, but constantly made terrible financial decisions, from declaring bankruptcy out loud as if that would erase his debts, to investing his life savings into a pyramid scheme. And yet, despite his complete lack of self-awareness, he was deeply human. Beneath the cringeworthy moments and disastrous leadership, there was an undeniable charm to Michael. What made Michael Scott work as a character wasn't just his comedy, but his heart. He genuinely cared about his employees, even if he didn't always know how to show it. His misguided attempts at bonding, like the disastrous Scott's Tots incident or his infamous Diversity Day meeting, often ended in disaster. But his intentions, no matter how misplaced, were always rooted in a desire to connect. And then there were the moments that proved Michael wasn't just comic relief. He was capable of real emotion. His relationship with Holly Flax gave him the love story he had always dreamed of. And in the end, it was his decision to leave Dunder Mifflin to be with her that gave him the happy ending he truly deserved. His goodbye, whispering an unheard phrase to Pam before walking away, remains one of the most emotional moments in the entire series. Michael Scott started as the boss from hell, but over time, he became something much more. A character who was ridiculous, frustrating, and sometimes completely embarrassing, yet also strangely inspiring. He showed that even the most flawed people have redeeming qualities, that it's okay to make mistakes as long as you try to learn from them, and that sometimes the family you choose is the one you spend every workday with. At the heart of The Office is a love story, one that unfolded slowly, naturally, and with all the awkwardness, uncertainty, and joy of a real relationship. Jim Halpert and Pam Beesly weren't just another sitcom couple, they felt real, and that's what made their love story so unforgettable. From the very first episode, there was something special between them. Jim, the charming, sarcastic salesman, was hopelessly in love with Pam, the receptionist who seemed just as smitten, but was stuck in a long-term engagement with her dull and controlling fiancé, Roy. Their connection wasn't forced, their flirtation wasn't over the top, and their stolen glances across the office felt like moments that could happen anywhere, in any workplace. For 3 seasons, Jim and Pam danced around their feelings, never quite at the right place at the right time. Jim confessed his love in the season 2 finale, only to have his heart broken when Pam wasn't ready to admit she felt the same way. He left Scranton, moving to another branch to try and move on, while Pam struggled with the realization that she had lost something truly special. Then, in a quiet, perfect moment, everything changed. No grand speeches, no dramatic gestures, just a simple, unexpected date at a gas station on a rainy night. From that moment, Jim and Pam became the kind of couple that didn't just feel written into a script. They felt real. They had inside jokes, awkward silences, and shared dreams. They supported each other, laughed together, and faced struggles that weren't always neat and easy. Unlike many TV couples that fall apart once they get together, Jim and Pam's relationship remained engaging because it wasn't always perfect. There were challenges. Jim's impulsive move to start a company, Pam's growing ambitions, the strain of balancing careers and family. But through it all, they remained partners. They weren't just in love, they were best friends. Their wedding at Niagara Falls was everything fans had waited for. The chaotic, hilarious lead-up, the surprise dance down the aisle, and the secret boat wedding before the ceremony. It was the perfect blend of heartfelt and absurd, just like their relationship. By the end of the series, Jim and Pam's journey wasn't just about romance, it was about growth. Pam, who had once been afraid to take risks, finally found her voice and pursued her dreams. Jim, who had spent years goofing off at a job he didn't love, found purpose beyond Dunder Mifflin. And in the final episodes, when it seemed like their love might not survive the pressures of change, Jim reminded Pam why she was always his biggest dream. Their final scene together, mirroring their very first moment in the pilot, was a quiet, beautiful reminder of why their story resonated so deeply. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic twists. It was about two people who found each other, grew together, and built a life that felt real. If The Office is a show about an ordinary workplace, then Dwight Schrute is the one person who makes it anything but ordinary. From the moment he appeared on screen with his mustard-coloured shirts, his deep love for authority, and his obsession with beats, it was clear. Dwight wasn't just another quirky character. He was the office's wild card, the most unpredictable and bizarre employee Dunder Mifflin had ever seen. Dwight took his job as assistant to the regional manager far too seriously, though he constantly corrected people, insisting he was actually the assistant regional manager. He was fiercely loyal to Michael Scott, treating him with an almost knight-like devotion, even when Michael mocked or dismissed him. To Dwight, office hierarchy wasn't just a structure, it was a way of life. But beneath his intense dedication to rules and order, Dwight was something of a mystery. He came from a long line of Schrutes, was raised on a beet farm, and followed a bizarre set of traditions that sounded more medieval than modern. His childhood stories, sleeping in coffins, hunting his own food, engaging in combat training, made it clear that he was raised very differently from his co-workers. And yet, for all his eccentricities, he somehow thrived in a completely normal corporate setting. His rivalry with Jim Halpert became one of the greatest prank wars in television history, from Jim putting Dwight's stapler in Jell-O to impersonating him completely, from convincing him he was being recruited by the CIA to leading him on a fake treasure hunt. Jim's constant torment of Dwight became a defining dynamic of the show. But as much as Jim annoyed him, there was always a strange, unspoken bond between them, one that became clearer as the series progressed. Dwight also had a softer side, though he tried to hide it. His love for Angela, despite her cold and demanding nature, was one of the most complicated romances in the series. He struggled with his emotions, trying to balance his desire for power with his need for connection. But in the end, Dwight found happiness, not just as the manager of Dunder Mifflin, but as a husband, a father, and a friend. His final moment with Jim, where Jim tells him that he was the best boss Dunder Mifflin ever had, was proof of just how much Dwight had changed. He wasn't just the odd, rigid, beet farming assistant anymore. He was a leader, a husband, and, in his own strange way, a man who had finally figured out what truly mattered. Dwight Schrute wasn't just the office's most eccentric character. He was its heart, its chaos, and its unexpected source of wisdom, even if that wisdom involved owning nunchucks, starting fires to test safety procedures, or believing that he could survive an apocalypse better than anyone else. When The Office first aired, it didn't look like any other sitcom on television. There was no laugh track, no flashy sets, and no perfectly timed punchlines. Instead, it felt real, as if the viewer had been dropped into a completely ordinary office with completely ordinary people. But that was the magic of The Office. The show's mockumentary format wasn't just a gimmick, it was what made The Office stand out. The characters weren't just performing for an audience. They were aware that cameras were following them. They gave knowing glances when something awkward happened, sighed into the lens when their co-workers embarrassed them, and sometimes just stared in silence, letting the awkwardness linger in a way that made everything feel even funnier. This format allowed for a completely different kind of comedy. Instead of delivering jokes in a traditional way, the humour came from natural conversations, uncomfortable pauses, and moments of pure, unscripted awkwardness. The talking head interviews gave characters a chance to explain their thoughts, defend their terrible decisions, or just quietly suffer through whatever chaos had unfolded around them. One of the most brilliant things about the documentary style was that it wasn't just there for comedy, it became part of the story itself. The presence of the cameras changed how the characters behaved. Michael Scott clearly wanted to be the star of the documentary, always hamming it up and trying to impress whoever might be watching. Jim used the camera crew as his personal audience, giving subtle smirks or exasperated looks whenever Dwight did something ridiculous. And as the series progressed, the documentary's existence became more important, especially in the later seasons when the characters started questioning why they had been filmed for so many years. Other sitcoms had experimented with breaking the fourth wall, but The Office perfected it. The camera didn't just capture the story, it was part of it. And by the time the series reached its emotional finale, when the documentary was finally released in universe, it became clear this wasn't just a comedy about an office. It was a story about people, about relationships, and about finding meaning in the most unexpected places. The mockumentary style has since influenced an entire generation of television. Shows like Parks and Recreation, Modern Family, and Abbott Elementary all followed in its footsteps, proving that The Office didn't just change the way sitcoms were made, it changed the way we experienced them. Some shows have memorable moments, but The Office has entire episodes that are legendary. Over 9 seasons, the series delivered some of the most quoted, rewatched, and hilariously awkward episodes in television history. Whether it was office-wide chaos, unforgettable pranks, or moments that made us unexpectedly emotional, The Office mastered the art of storytelling through everyday absurdity. One of the most famous episodes is Dinner Party, where Michael and Jan invite a few unlucky employees to their deeply uncomfortable and painfully awkward home for a night that spirals into passive-aggressive chaos. Between Jan's obsession with her former assistant, Michael's tiny plasma screen TV, and the infamous moment when Jan throws a Dundie at the wall, it's an episode that's as hard to watch as it is impossible to look away from. Then there's Stress Relief, which opens with one of the greatest cold opens in television history. Dwight, in an attempt to test fire safety, stages a completely unnecessary fire drill, leading to mass panic as Stanley has a heart attack. Angela throws her cat into the ceiling, and Michael screams for people to stay asterisk in calm. The episode also features Jim and Pam's parents meeting for the first time, and Michael's unforgettable attempt at leading a CPR training session that somehow ends with an impromptu Stayin' Alive dance number, and Dwight harvesting a dummy's face like Hannibal Lecter. Some episodes, though, weren't just about comedy. Niagara was a long-awaited payoff for fans who had followed Jim and Pam's love story from the very beginning. Their wedding at Niagara Falls was supposed to be a disaster, but in classic Office fashion, the couple found a way to make it their own, secretly getting married on a boat before their big, chaotic ceremony, complete with a dance down the aisle that has since become one of the show's most iconic moments. And then there's Goodbye Michael, the episode that marked the end of Steve Carell's time on the show. It was a farewell to Michael Scott, a character who had been frustrating, hilarious, and surprisingly lovable. But what made the episode so powerful was how quiet and simple his goodbye was. Instead of making a big speech or drawing attention to himself, he just whispered a final goodbye to Pam before heading to the airport, leaving behind the office he had called home. Other fan-favourite episodes include The Injury, where Michael burns his foot on a George Foreman grill, Threat Level Midnight, where his long-awaited homemade action movie is finally revealed, and Beach Games, where Dwight walks across hot coals, Andy floats away in an inflatable sumo suit, and Pam finally finds the courage to speak her mind. The best thing about The Office is that everyone has their own favourite episode, the one they always return to, the one they can quote by heart. Whether it's a prank war between Jim and Dwight, a ridiculous scheme from Michael, or an unexpected emotional moment, The Office was more than just a sitcom. It was a collection of some of the best moments in TV history. For a show that feels so natural and effortless, The Office was built on carefully crafted chaos behind the scenes. From casting decisions that almost went in completely different directions to improvised moments that became legendary, the making of The Office was just as fascinating as the show itself. One of the biggest what-ifs in television history is that John Krasinski almost didn't play Jim Halpert. Before he got the role, Krasinski was just another struggling actor, waiting tables and auditioning. NBC executives originally wanted someone more traditionally handsome for Jim, and at one point, Krasinski was nearly cast as Dwight instead. But when he auditioned with Jenna Fischer, the chemistry between them was undeniable. In fact, Fischer herself has said that as soon as he left the room, she turned to the casting directors and told them, "That's Jim." And speaking of Jenna Fischer, her casting as Pam came down to one unexpected moment. During her audition, she was asked to perform one of the classic Pam talking head interviews, where she had to describe how boring her job was. Instead of delivering a punchline, Fischer just sat there, blinking into the camera, looking completely unimpressed. That tiny moment of silence was enough to land her the role. Steve Carell's portrayal of Michael Scott was so perfect that it's hard to believe he almost didn't take the role. When The Office was being developed, Carell was already working on another show called Come to Papa, which thankfully was cancelled, freeing him up to take on what would become one of the most iconic TV roles of all time. Some of The Office's best moments weren't even in the script. Many of the show's funniest lines were completely improvised. The moment when Kevin spills his giant pot of chili, Brian Baumgartner actually did that in one take, completely destroying the carpet in the process. Steve Carell's legendary "No God, please no" reaction when Toby returned was entirely unscripted. Carell just ran with it, and it became one of Michael Scott's most famous moments. One of the most emotional scenes in the series, Michael's final goodbye with Pam at the airport, was never supposed to be filmed. The show's crew had intended to keep the moment private, but a camera operator secretly followed Jenna Fischer as she ran towards Steve Carell, capturing their final embrace in real time. That hug? That wasn't just Pam and Michael saying goodbye. It was Jenna and Steve, after years of working together, having a real, unscripted farewell. Even the way the show was filmed made it unique. Instead of traditional TV cameras, The Office was shot with handheld cameras to make it feel like a real documentary. The actors were given freedom to move around naturally, and sometimes the crew would let scenes play out just to see how the actors would react. That's why The Office never felt like a scripted sitcom. It felt like we were actually watching these characters exist in their weird little world. Over the years, The Office became a second home for the cast and crew. They spent nearly a decade together, creating something that went beyond just television. And long after the cameras stopped rolling, those friendships remained. The magic of The Office wasn't just in the writing or the jokes, it was in the real connections, the improvisation, and the moments that weren't planned, but became unforgettable anyway. Some TV shows come and go. Others leave a lasting imprint on pop culture, shaping the way we talk, joke, and even interact. The Office isn't just a sitcom, it's a cultural phenomenon that continues to influence comedy, social media, and even the way people view their own workplaces. One of the biggest reasons The Office remains relevant is its meme culture. Few shows have generated as many viral moments as The Office, from Michael Scott's over-the-top reactions to Jim's signature deadpan looks into the camera. If you've ever seen a meme of Michael shouting, "No God, please no," or Dwight passionately declaring false, or Pam looking unimpressed, then you already know how deeply the show has embedded itself into internet culture. The show's humor wasn't just made for TV, it was made for the digital age, where quick, relatable moments could be shared, quoted, and turned into thousands of reaction images and GIFs. Beyond memes, The Office has changed the way we think about workplace dynamics. The characters at Dunder Mifflin aren't just fictional, they're archetypes that exist in real life. Everyone has worked with a Michael Scott, someone who is completely out of touch but means well. Every office has a Jim and Pam, two co-workers with unspoken chemistry. And unfortunately, every workplace has at least one Dwight Schrute, taking their job far too seriously and enforcing rules that no one asked for. Even though it ended in 2013, The Office has remained one of the most rewatched shows in streaming history. Its move to streaming platforms introduced it to an entirely new generation, and for many, it's become the ultimate comfort show. There's something about The Office that feels familiar, easy to watch, and endlessly rewatchable. Whether it's playing in the background while people work, or being revisited for the 10th time, The Office has reached the same status as Friends or Seinfeld, a sitcom that never really fades. But its impact goes beyond just streaming numbers. It changed television comedy forever. Before The Office, most sitcoms followed the traditional multi-camera format with laugh tracks. After The Office, the mockumentary style became a staple. Shows like Parks and Recreation, Modern Family, and Abbott Elementary all took inspiration from the way The Office blended comedy with realism. It also launched careers. Steve Carell became a Hollywood star. John Krasinski transitioned into directing and action films. Mindy Kaling built an empire of her own with shows like The Mindy Project and Never Have I Ever. Rainn Wilson became synonymous with Dwight Schrute, one of TV's most iconic characters. More than a decade after its finale, The Office still holds a special place in pop culture. It's not just a show, it's a shared experience, a source of nostalgia, and proof that sometimes the most ordinary places can create the most extraordinary stories. Some shows make an impact for a few years. Others become part of something bigger, a shared experience that spans generations. The Office is one of those rare shows that has never really ended, even after its final episode aired in 2013. It lives on in memes, in streaming marathons, in pop culture references, and most importantly, in the hearts of the fans who keep coming back to it. What makes The Office so special isn't just the comedy, it's the characters, the relationships, and the way it captures the absurdity of everyday life. It's a show about a paper company that no one cares about, yet it makes you care. It's a series where nothing really happens, yet somehow everything that happens feels important. It finds humor in the mundane, meaning in the meaningless, and connection in the most unexpected places. The legacy of The Office is seen in the way people rewatch it endlessly, finding comfort in the familiar awkwardness of Michael Scott, the slow burn love story of Jim and Pam, and the bizarre yet oddly inspiring journey of Dwight Schrute. It's the kind of show that can make you laugh one moment and hit you with unexpected emotion the next. It also changed television forever. The mockumentary format has since been used in countless other comedies, proving that The Office wasn't just successful, it was revolutionary. It redefined sitcoms, proving that humor doesn't need a laugh track, that real moments of silence can be just as funny as a punchline, and that characters can feel like real people rather than just exaggerated versions of themselves. And then there's the finale. After 9 seasons, the documentary within the show is finally released, and the characters get to watch their own lives unfold. They reflect on how they've changed, how The Office shaped them, and how, in the end, it wasn't just a job, it was a family. The last words of the series, spoken by Pam, sum up why The Office will always matter. There's a lot of beauty in ordinary things. Isn't that kind of the point? That's why The Office endures. It takes something as simple as working in a small paper company and turns it into something meaningful, funny, and surprisingly heartfelt. It reminds us that life's best moments often happen in the most unexpected places, and that even the most frustrating co-workers can feel like family. So as the doors of Dunder Mifflin finally close, the legacy of The Office remains. It's a show people will keep discovering, keep revisiting, and keep quoting for years to come. Because sometimes the best stories aren't about heroes or epic battles. They're about the people you sit next to at work, day after day, in a job that might not mean much to the world, but means everything to the people who live it. Thank you for spending your night with Lost at 3 a.m. Sweet dreams, and we'll see you next time.